light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few thoughts and reflections on God. And I understand, I have a number of friends who are atheists, in fact, and not a problem. That which is God doesn't cease to exist or suddenly exist based on whether or not we believe. God is God. That which is God, and that which is not God, in spite of what any church or religion says, is still not God. The challenge for us, I guess, as humans, is that we're finite beings reaching for glimpses of the infinite, and we don't have the Geiger counter or the meters or devices or whatever it is we need to measure and confirm spiritual realities. We're not to that point of development. We're not to that point of comprehension. I don't know that, other than as an intellectual construct, I'm not sure that the finite can encompass the infinite without, in fact, being the infinite. And I think it's quite a long ways before we get to that point. But to me, it's not so much important that anyone believes in God the same way. I find it to be true, but if someone else doesn't find it convincing, it's okay. I would never want to push somebody into believing something they didn't, or to essentially living a lie for the sake of gaining my approval. Through this show, though, in these little half-hour segments where we can barely scratch the surface, I hope to provide food for thought and to scratch the surface, encourage a curious mind, encourage a certain openness of mind, so that when we experience things, so that when that which is truly God decides to manifest itself in some way, we're paying attention and we see it and we notice it, rather than having things go by that we didn't even see. And why didn't we see them? Well, sometimes because we weren't looking for them, sometimes because we were focused on other things. I recall reading of a study once of perception where it's kind of elaborate to describe, but the results that were reported were absolutely amazing and very funny in retrospect in a way too. There were two people sitting on this is all on a movie screen, so it's been filmed, and then the film is played. And it's a bare stage, and there's two chairs facing each other, and you have two people come out and sit in the chairs, and one of them has a large beach ball, and they begin to toss the beach ball back and forth between them. Just sitting there tossing a beach ball back and forth. And they made this movie. They brought in an audience of study participants, and they told them, I want you to count how many times the beach ball goes back and forth between the two people. And when we get done, we'll ask you how many times was it. And so they play this little 5-10 minute video, and they're counting how many times the beach ball is going back and forth. Well, what they didn't tell them is that about 2/3 of the way into this little movie they're showing, somebody in a gorilla suit comes on stage, stands upstage from the two people, and the beach ball is still going back and forth, beats on his chest, comes down, ducking between the tosses of the beach ball, beats on his chest, turns around and goes back again as the beach ball keeps going back and forth, beats on his chest again, and then goes off stage. When they finished, and they asked people, so how many times was the beach ball tossed back and forth? And people came up with all these numbers. And they said, and what did you think of the gorilla? And I don't remember if it was the majority or if it was half the people, but a huge percentage of the audience basically looked at the researcher and said, what gorilla? They had been so focused on counting the beach ball that with all that movement, their mind did not acknowledge that a gorilla had even been on stage in this little movie. And so then they played the movie again, and of course this time they all saw the gorilla because they were told, because now they knew to look for it. And they accused the researchers of having two movies and playing a different one the second time. And of course, you can search the operator's booth. There's no other movie in the theater. This is the only movie we brought. But the people had such a hard time believing that they could be so focused on the beach ball that they would not see a gorilla do what I described. It's the way the brain filters what's perceived and what's not. That's a kind of long explanation, but the warning for in all of that for us is that we go through life looking for things or not looking for things, wanting to believe in things or wanting to disbelieve things. And there is a certain extent to which our brain allows us whatever we choose to believe or not believe. I don't want to go off the deep end, though. Well, forgive me for describing it that way. My apologies to all my New Age friends. I've met a number of people who insist that what you believe happens. And I usually say, okay, this morning I was going to go jogging with the dogs, and I forgot to unlock the front door. And I went to the front door, and I tried to open it, and it wouldn't open. I believed I had unlocked it. It didn't make the door unlocked. The door was still locked until I took the key out, put it in the lock, turned the bolt back, and physically unlocked the door. It wasn't just a question of belief. It was more than that. It was a combination of things. It was belief and it was physical actions. But so it's this kind of question that's still open for study of how much can belief do? And the thing that makes the study a little more frustrating is that in different people, in different situations, belief seems to do more or less than in others. In the same way that in that audience watching the movie of the beach ball with the gorilla suddenly appearing, some of the people did see the gorilla, but most did not. Why did some people see it and most did not? And that's where the researchers have their work cut out for them. Why do some people's brains filter things out and others don't? Why, and did the belief of those people that the gorilla wasn't there remove the gorilla from the film? Obviously not, because the gorilla was seen by the other people. Did my belief that the door was unlocked mean the door was unlocked? No, of course not. I got to it and it wouldn't open. My belief, my hopes were disappointed. That happens from time to time. There have been things that I anticipated and looked forward to with such eagerness that it took me several days to accept the fact that what I had wanted, what I had worked for, hadn't happened. That my trust had been betrayed, that my beliefs had been disappointed. That happens also. But there are, just as often as that happens, there are other times I can point to where I chose to believe and it did happen. I don't know, however, I've met plenty of people who insist there are no coincidences. I don't know if I can say all or none. Are there no coincidences? Are some things labeled a coincidence and not a coincidence? It depends on how you look at it, I suppose, but there doesn't seem to be 100% consistency for any conclusion anybody wants to give. There was a time, for example, where I noticed a particular type of Jeep vehicle and I decided, when I noticed it, it's like I really, really liked it. And I said, I would really like one of those. And for 5 years, nothing happened. No opportunity came up. I didn't have the money to go out and buy one. I really didn't give it another thought. And then I was out walking my dogs with a friend one day, came around the corner, and there's one of them sitting there at an affordable price, parked along the street with a for sale sign in the window. And everything fell into place in a matter of days. I got the vehicle. I drove it for over 7 years up beyond 200,000 miles. It was just one of the best vehicles I've ever had. And I enjoyed it immensely. Every moment I had it. It was just such a wondrous blessing. I don't know to what extent my belief or recognition or wish for it 5 or 6 years beforehand had anything to do with its appearing that day. But there have been other things like that where I'll put the wish or the belief out there, and in defiance of all probability and statistics, it pops into view. So why can't I do that all the time? Why can't I make it happen every time? Well, it seems to me we're back to saying there's a whole lot of things that have to converge, a whole lot of different influences that have to add up and work like the interconnected gear wheels of a clock in order for it to happen. You know, if someone chooses to believe in God or not, it's partly a matter of belief, partly a matter of the divine being willing to manifest itself in some way, partly being open to the divine manifesting itself in an unusual way. It's fascinating, I suppose, if you want to look at reports and descriptions of the divine throughout human history and across all different cultures and religions. The number of forms ascribed to God. And I don't have the perspective I would need to say which ones are true and which ones aren't. You know, that if I could visit that geographical place and moment in time, whether I would see exactly what the writer described in exactly the same way. I don't know. I don't have the ability to check it out that way, or to confirm it. But if we assume that all the reports are potentially true, that means the divine has manifested in so many different forms that being dogmatic about what God is like is a totally pointless activity. God may choose to manifest in any form that God has manifested in the past, or in any new form, or in no form at all. God may be a voice, a thought, a whisper, an impression, an intuition, a pillar of fire, a cloud of smoke, a burning bush, a thundering voice, a whisper in the wind. It's, you know, by definition, the infinite can assume any form within its spectrum. And I'm not prepared to say that a finite human mind can comprehend all the ways that an infinite spectrum could manifest itself. The fascinating thing when you look at spiritual relationships, I suppose, is that the finite and the infinite seem to frequently have, maybe not always, but frequently at least, have this mutual desire for a relationship of love and wisdom between them. That there is something in the infinite that seeks to love the finite, and something in the finite that seeks to love the infinite. And whether that is expressed in scientific terms, or religious terms, or atheistic terms, or whatever terms, essentially what it all boils down to is the finite relating to the infinite, the human being relating to that which is beyond itself. So how do we accept that the infinite can have any form? And how do we create an empowering relationship? How do we benefit from that kind of belief? That we can look at a picture taken by the Hubble telescope and go, wow, and be filled with a sense of awe, and try to reach out with our mind and heart to comprehend the existence of incredible universes like nothing we've ever dreamed, and to open ourselves to infinite possibility, and to perhaps the apparently, or it would feel magical, the magical ability of telepathic communication with an extraterrestrial species. Some people claim to have done that already. I haven't had any such experience myself, but I have no frame of reference to say that their experience is false. It's one of those, can't prove it, can't disprove it. Maybe so. If it helps, great. If it hurt, as I keep saying to people, if it's helpful, hold on to it. If it doesn't help, let it go. It may be for someone else, or it may not be true at all. But I trust that which is loving and wise and true will be helpful in some respect at some point. I mean, there are things that I discover that aren't helpful for me till 5 years later, because the manifestation of the divine within that thing is something that I, at that point, am not mature enough to integrate. Like, it would be like being 10 years old and being totally fascinated by my cousin's new Trans Am or Firebird Pontiac automobile. And wow, isn't that a beautiful car? But at 10 years old, I can't drive it, I can't comprehend it, I don't know how an engine works, I don't even know how to fill the gas tank. I think it has something to do with the pump and something to do with that, but there's idiosyncrasies, like what if you have a locking gas cap? What if you forgot to put the lever up? Which buttons do you push? What if it has an automatic shut-off? I mean, there's all sorts of variances. But at a certain age, all I can do is watch in amazement as, well, go younger. When I was 4, sitting on the front seat watching my father drive the car, and he would pull one lever and push on another pedal and so forth, and the car would move. But I really didn't know at that point the association between a movement of the foot and the movement of the car, or a movement of the steering wheel and the movement of the car, that suddenly it would change direction and that was a consequence of what he had done. And of course, in any moment, there was all these things going on, and then of course there was a time where the car slid off the road and slid into the ditch when I was a very small boy. And thankfully nobody was hurt. We just stopped very suddenly in a snowbank. And that was a convergence of my father's steering, the running of the engine, the turning of the wheels, the fact that there was ice on the road, that it was winter time, and that we were on a hill in Wisconsin. All of those things coming together to make the experience of a moment. In a sense, you could say that moment was overdetermined, meaning, that's a wonderful word I got from the author Scott Peck, overdetermined, meaning there are so many influences and causes that you can't really say which one is most at fault. But it was all of them coming together to make it happen. In having a relationship with the divine, which I think there is a relationship, it's just a question of what form that relationship takes and in what ways we involve ourselves in that relationship. If we are trying to relate to that which is beyond ourselves, to do so with attempts to express love, attempts to express wisdom, attempts to express questions, invitations for involvement. When I would pray, God, please guide me to whatever, and not always, but certain times in ways that were so conspicuous, it was almost impossible to deny that there was some sort of intervention. That the last person I expected to show up did at exactly the right moment. And that if they had been 30 seconds later, the meeting never would have happened. It becomes so improbable as to be considered impossible. And that's where I have to wonder, and I find I have to wonder, and I therefore open myself to the possibility that there is something spiritual that does interact. And yet the level of language and understanding between me and that non-material something is so minimal and so infantile and so juvenile in beginning, and I'm learning the first few words of a vast language, and what I am learning is not adequate to give me full comprehension or really any significant depth of understanding, considering how vast the knowledge is. It's like as I keep saying to people, I'm a glass of water, God is the ocean. How does a glass of water comprehend the ocean, even though a glass of water may experience, you can scoop a glass of water out of the ocean and have one little glass of the ocean in front of you, but that one little glass, even though it has something of the same substance, something of a minuscule amount of the same ingredients, doesn't have the ability to comprehend the currents and the tides and the creatures that live within the ocean and the topography of the ocean floor, the mountains and canyons that exist below the surface of the ocean that most human eyes have never seen. That if the entire planet were suddenly dry and we could explore those in the same way that we can explore the Grand Canyon, it would take our breath away because of how awesome just the shape of the earth is underneath all that water. So much that we don't know, even though we've been here thousands of years, or some would say millions of years. In all of that, I guess, all I'm saying is to be open to the infinite, open to the transcendent, open to the possibility that if something remarkable happens, maybe it's contact with something, maybe it's a moment of touching the fingertips of something transcendent. Transcendent and yet also imminent. Imminent meaning that God, there's a sense in which God is within everything that God has made. In the same, perhaps in a similar way, that an artist puts himself or herself into their work. That when a painter paints a painting, to put yourself into your painting so much that someone who sees it can begin to get a sense of who you are and what you were feeling at the time you were painting it. And that's not an easy task to do. There are people who study art for years to be able to do that. Photographers who study photography for years, trying to figure out how to capture on two-dimensional film an actual human emotion, to where everybody who looks at that photograph knows exactly what the person in the photograph is feeling. There's no mystery, but at the same time, it's a complex feeling. It's not just being afraid or just being happy, but it's being happy or afraid in a very, very specific way. In a similar way, if we're talking about a human being relating to the divine, the relationship is always very, very specific, and the way one person relates to God may be entirely different from the way another person relates to God. The triumph is not that we all believe in God or relate to God the same way, but that everyone finds a way to relate to God, and that God has a way of infusing wisdom and love into each individual life on this planet. And if it is through Christianity or Islam or Judaism or a solitary mystical experience, or through an atheistic study of science, or through a neo-pagan embrace of nature, the miracle is not that it's the same as everybody else's, but the fact that it happens at all. I hope this episode has been good for helping you to begin to scratch the surface of these ideas. I encourage you to ponder these ideas and be gentle with yourself. Don't demand too many answers right away. It's a lot to take in. And your spiritual path may be absolutely and totally unique. And you may find a variety of different things helpful to your spiritual path. And that's great too. If you want to be a guest in a future episode and talk about what you're discovering on your spiritual path and how many diverse things it's included, and when did you feel that overwhelming sense of awe that there was something so much greater than you that was absolutely present and involved in your life, that somehow you were not just an insignificant little dot crawling through time, but that you were a living soul, and that you experienced something that empowered that soul to genuinely grow, to understand and appreciate and participate in things in ways that you previously could not have. The final note of clarification, I guess perhaps I should have put toward the beginning, is I keep saying it more and more, hoping the idea will catch on. And it's not an idea that started with me. I found it on the internet myself, from a woman author whose name I apologize, I don't recall, and I'm not sure if she was borrowing it from somewhere else, so I don't know where the idea started. But that was that when I spell the word God, I spell it Godde, something that distinguishes itself from the patriarchal God of the last few centuries, that has been described in sometimes unhelpful ways, and yet not going to the other extreme of saying that God is actually female, and saying only goddess, but between the two to say that that which is truly God has aspects of maleness and femaleness and personhood and form and energy and wisdom and love that transcend all of our understandings of what it means to be a person. That the human comprehension of personhood is totally inadequate to comprehend the personhood that is genuinely a multidimensional, timeless, eternal God. We are temporal, God is eternal. We are finite, God is infinite. And whether you meet God in an art gallery or a church, a synagogue, or a forest, may your relationship with the divine be richly blessed. May your soul be empowered to grow. May you find each new day a combination of miraculous possibilities. And may one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Thank you for watching.